Robert Dean Steele. From time to time, I give relational advice. And today, of course, I want to give some relational advice, especially to the guys today. This is the main direction towards the guys, but it also has an application to the women as well. So, Father, bless this time and bless this, uh, you know, advice we ask in Jesus' name. Well, the first thing I want to tell the guys is simply this, and the ladies, that the traditional role of man and women have slowly over the last few decades kind of been muddied. In the old times, in times before, let's say, the 1960s, where everyone was basically dealing with the new way of thinking. Well, men were supposed to, take care of the ladies, and the ladies were basically to be taken care of by men. Well, that, of course, is not happening any longer. Nowadays, you have ladies who say, I don't need anything from any man. And basically, you have men starting to abandon their traditional roles. I remember back in the 1980s, one of my favorite sitcoms was, of course, Who's the Boss? And in the scenario of Who the Boss, you have, of course, Judith Light, who played this executive, this high powered, executive, ad executive. And then you had Tony Danza, who was, every bit a machismo type of man, being, of course, her housekeeper. And you saw the tension that was going on between a traditional role and also a new imposed role. And of course, the show tried to say that, listen, you can be a man without losing or doing an ordinary job like being a housekeeper and not lose any of your masculinity. But I remember this one particular funny incident where Angela, who was played by Judith Light, comes home with her boss, and they have had just a wonderful dinner together. And they're downstairs, and they are, of course, having a good time. And he's the boss is trying to talk Angela into having, an intimate relationship. Tony hears all this noise going on downstairs, so he rushes downstairs with a baseball bat and confronts the boss. And basically, Angela has to explain that, of course, Tony is her, housekeeper. And the boss says, that's the ugliest housekeeper I have ever seen, because, of course, the traditional role is that a housekeeper or a nanny is, of course, a lady, not a man. But in, of course, the sitcom Who's the Boss, you see the tension that goes on when there is a role reversal. And that is what's happening today. We see so many role reversals where we see ladies are being forced to actually enter into the workaday world. Many families today, of course, need both incomes just to survive. Did you know that back in the 1950s and 60s, even into the late 40s, that many homes only needed one income? In fact, in 1971, it was only one income that families could survive on. But nowadays, because of the cost of living, did you know that, let's say, for example, in 1975, this is what happened in my country of Canada. I, of course, started driving in 1974. And when I first started driving, the average price of gas was about 25 cents a gallon, 25 cents a Canadian gallon. Then something happened during the mid 70s. The nation, or the national government at the time, decided to go to, from imperial measurements to metric measurements. They said, and the reason they said it is because the rest of the world was on metric. So Canada went metric. And the first thing that you noticed, of course, was the gasoline. We went from the Canadian imperial gallon to, of course, the liter. And all of a sudden, the first thing we noticed was the price of gasoline began to go up. It started off at about 10 cents a liter. Get this, the price of gas went from 25 cents a gallon to, of course, 10 cents a liter. That means that and a liter, it takes 4.5 liters to make a Canadian imperial gallon. So the price of gas went from 25 cents a gallon up to about 45 cents an imperial gallon, based upon, of course, the liter. All of a sudden, we were paying almost 40% more. And we didn't even notice. Now today in Canada, we have seen the price of the liter, especially right after the COVID-19. We saw the price of a liter of gas go to over $2 a liter. That means that the average Canadian, right after the COVID-19 and that whole acceleration of what we would call inflation, where it was doing 9 or 10% almost every month, we saw the price of gas in Canada paying $9 an imperial gallon. And we were based upon that. Now we're back down here in Alberta to about $1.19 a liter, but that still means that we're almost paying $5 a gallon. And that is in the span of 50 years. We've seen the same thing happen when it comes to gas. Just 4 or 5 years ago, apples is a perfect example. Apples were at $3 and or $4 a bag for 3 pounds. Now, of course, for 3 pounds, it depends on the apples, but it can be anywhere from $7 to $9, for a bag of apples. You can see the same when it comes to, for example, potatoes, which is a staple. The average potato before, a bag of potatoes, 10 pounds of potatoes, was about $3. Now it averages anywhere from $7 to $10. That has happened just in the space of 5 years. And so we are right now in a position where, of course, both parents, both men and women, when they form a relationship and either common law or marriage, or they become partners together in some form, guess what? They end up having to earn both people. My son is a perfect example of that. My son is an educational assistant, but he doesn't earn enough money in his job to be able to support his entire family. So his wife has to, of course, work. She's a manager at McDonald's, and their combined income barely allows them to be able to take care of their 2 girls. So that's what's happening with so many families. And so what happens is the woman has to go outside the home and earn money so the family can survive. That puts tremendous pressure on ladies today, and it has flipped the traditional role and has caused women to actually have to compete in the world with men. And men and women, believe it or not, are actually wired differently. Men are wired generally to be aggressive. Men are wired generally to, of course, to be masculine. We are by nature protectors. We are by nature, of course, people who go out and do the jobs. I watch these TikTok videos and other social media videos, and there was this one particular, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek type of situation where this lady gets up and says, "We don't need men," and then they start showing all the jobs that men do. Of course, 97% of all jobs when it comes to basic infrastructure is done by men. Now, it is true that about 80% of all healthcare jobs are done by women. So there is, and it's interesting that at the turn of the century, that was basically the ratio. And still today, it is the ratio where most of the infrastructure and tough jobs are done by men. And the traditional jobs of healthcare are done by women. And of course, retail, most of the retail jobs are done by ladies. It hasn't really changed all that much since, the 1920s. 100 years later, we're still basically doing the same jobs. Why? Because we're wired a certain way. But here's my advice, okay? Gentlemen, be gentle with a woman who has been forced into a role and, a certain aspect when it comes to society. These days, women are expected to pursue a career, and to find someone who actually chooses to stay home and take care of their children and all of that is actually a rarity. It's also a rarity to find a man staying home and being Mr. Mom. There, of course, have been movies about that situation, but that is a role reversal. I have met men who have stayed home and taken care of their family when there was a woman who was in a high powered position. I know people like that, but it's difficult on both of them. And I have seen the tension that goes. So, my simple advice to men is simply this: if you find yourself in a relationship with someone who has been forced into a role that traditionally they are not accompanied or expected to be in, and they may do it very well. There's a lot of ladies out there that do their job in, when we're talking about the corporate world or different roles, of course, they do very well. My daughter, for example, does very well in her nursing role. She actually has become one of the top nurse representatives for her union, and she's very, very good at her job. We asked our daughter, we said to her, listen, we know the world in which we live. And so you are going to have to, be able to take care of yourself. Now, she met a wonderful man, and he's a very good provider. And together, they have been able to carve out a very good home. But my daughter also, as well, is very capable, and she does very, very well. But she struggles from time to time with making sure that she is, knows her role at home. And she does very well at both. I commend her tremendously. But you see, what can happen is that, men can be very unsympathetic. And we also, by, of course, nature, have a tendency to, ignore the feelings of those that we love and care about. So it means that we as men must never over we must understand that we need to meet her where she is. Life has often hardened the ladies in our lives. And what we need to do is show her that they don't have to embrace for impact any longer. It is a well known fact that 1 in 3 ladies in their lives are going to face very difficult circumstances when it comes to intimate relationships with men. Men are going to take advantage of them. Let me give you an example of that. Jesus met a woman in Samaria. She's known as the Samaritan woman. And she came down to the well at Sychar during the middle of the day. Jesus was laying on the side of the well. And he said, "Give me a drink of water." Now, the woman was surprised, first of all, that a man would speak to her. Secondly, that it would be a Jewish man that would speak to her. And she was very surprised by that. And then the conversation kind of, evolved. And Jesus then said to her, "Go get your husband." Well, she says, "I don't have a husband." He said, "You're right. You've had 5 husbands, and the one that you're living with right now is not your husband. What Jesus was basically coming across with this woman, and it was even common back in those days, where women would be looking for love in all the wrong faces and looking for love in all the wrong places. You see, as soon as you get in your idea, in your mind, that this person, of course, that you're coming into relationship is somehow going to meet every need that you have, that is a fantasy and that is an illusion. And yet, back in the day, women were led to believe that. Now, of course, women are more and more realistic when it comes to relationships. They understand that, and I love this particular view. You have two imperfect people seeing the perfection in each other or overlooking the imperfections of each other and choosing to stay together and to work together, to communicate together, and to love together in spite of our imperfections. And so, this woman, of course, Jesus was able to minister to her, show her that she had value and had dignity. And that's what we need to do today with the women in our lives. We need to love them. We know that they're not perfect. We know that society is trying to, fit them into a role and a mold that basically they weren't wired to particularly, do. Now, I do know that there are ladies who have what we would call masculine qualities, qualities where they can compete in a man's world. But traditionally, women are not designed to do that. They are designed to be helpmates. They are designed to complete the man. It was a person who put it this way. When God created man or created woman, he created her out of the rib of man, not out of the head to be above him, not out of his feet to be below him, but out of his rib to become a partner with him, to complete him. And so when society has basically made women into a role and into a certain way that they weren't designed to be, it creates all kinds of conflict. Men do not know what they're supposed to do anymore because we live in a society where basically masculinity has been toxified. It has been contaminated. And many men, actually, what's happening today, many men are reverting back to their traditional role, but they're not engaging in relationships anymore. Did you know that, for example, in the nation of Sweden, this was a study that they did in the early 2000s. 50% of the adult population had chosen to, of course, not engage in relationships anymore. That meant that 50% of the population were living alone and had learned to become confident in that role. And that's beginning to happen here in Canada and the United States. And what's happening is, of course, as soon as that happens, the birth rate plummets. And that's what's happening, for example, in Japan, where just 10 years ago, they had a population of 130 million people. Now, in 2025, when they did their last census, they were now down to 120 million people. In just 5 years, they had lost of 10 million people. Get that? 10 million people had disappeared. In Japan alone, they have 13 million abandoned homes. 13 million abandoned homes. Why? Because there's a population decrease. Because men and women have decided they're not going to engage in relationships. And as soon as that happens, guess what? The population decreases. Now, for my nation of Canada, for example, the population among the traditional Canadian society has plummeted, where we are now down to one child for every single family. Now, fortunately for Canada, we have a large group of people wanting to come to Canada. And over, the 10 years that Justin Trudeau was our prime minister, our nation gained 5 million people. It gained 5 million people because people were coming to Canada on an average of 500,000 every year. But you see what happens when men and women decide to no longer engage in relationships, then the population obviously is going to go down. Well, that's because women are being told that they can be complete without a man in their lives and without having children, and many are choosing that particular role. And then, of course, there is a real struggle on ladies because society says, well, you got to have a career. So many of these ladies are actually burning out and struggling with the fact that they're going to have a family. My daughter, for example, had to come to grips with that. She had to come to grips with the fact that she was going to have 4 children. My daughter, Rachel, has 4 children. I told you that she was very successful in what she does, but she had to learn to balance between, of course, what she was doing. My daughter actually, for the majority of while her kids were growing up, she did half time as a nurse. That means that she would work, basically my son-in-law would work 4 days and he would then take 4 days off and she would work the other 4 days. Now it was very difficult on their relationship, and they managed to find the right vibe, the right way to do it. And they've had a very successful family, but it didn't happen just happenstance. They had to work very, very hard at it. And they now have been married over 20 years and they have 4 wonderful, well-adjusted kids. And we're grateful for that. But it was a real struggle for them at the beginning of their relationship. So you see, what happens to the ladies is that they can become hardened and they don't know how to balance things out, and they're bracing for an impact. So what we need to do as men, give them strength without posing, protection without control, presence without pressure. That is the new role that men have to take. But also as well, it's a traditional role because traditionally men, of course, do protection. We see that even today in law enforcement. We see that, for example, the majority of law enforcement today is still men. Why? Because a perfect example of that, it was a video that I saw where there was a man who was supposed to be taken into custody by 2 ladies. Okay. Now we're not talking about, a kung fu lady who can knock a guy down. It was 2 ladies that were basically trying to, 2 female police officers who were trying to take this man into custody. He was a larger man and neither one of them could wrestle him down. So basically what happened was there was another man that was in the area. And so he walked over and he was able to subject this particular man, take him down. And the ladies were able to put the cuffs on him because traditionally ladies are not as strong as men. Now I know that there are some ladies that are very strong out there, but basically women have 35% less muscle mass than the average man. So of course there are going to be some difficult things that happen along that line. So we as men, what we can do is we can offer strength without posing. We don't have to say, hey, look at me, I'm protecting you. We can have protection without control and presence without, of course, pressure. Let me just tell you guys, any man can be tough, but turning your strength into a safe place is, as far as I'm concerned, top tier masculinity. Gentlemen, I want to give you a little piece of advice as we close today. I've rambled a little bit, but here's my advice for you. If you have somebody in your life, a lady in your life, offer her a safe place to be. Offer her a life where she can be herself and you can be yourself as well. Ladies, understand the role difference between men and women. You're not in, of course, competition. Often that's what happens. Men feel in competition with the ladies, but a truly masculine man, a man who knows his own worth, will understand that the roles we have are different. Not, more important than the other. Because, for example, in a family situation, 80% of the nurturing comes from the ladies. They do it naturally. But 85% of our children's self esteem comes from the masculine role model in their lives. And so both have a part to play when it comes to, of course, developing relationships and developing family and developing, the things that make society strong. So, gentlemen, you can be tough, but turning your strength into a safe place, that to me is top tier masculinity. And that's also where, and this is my final piece of advice, men, make sure that you have people in your life that keep you accountable. Be transparent. Be an individual who is willing to change. Be an individual who is willing to grow. Be an individual who is willing to adapt and evolve. Yes, roles are changing. And what we need to do is we need to show society what a strong man is all about. You don't have to beat your chest. You don't have to be like Hulk Hogan was back in the 80s when he said, "Look at these 26-inch pythons. I'm a real man." You don't have to, strut. I know in, of course, nature, you have, the male of the species walking around puffing and, showing off his plumage. Sometimes men show off their plumage, but a quiet, strong, masculine man doesn't have to do that. And that only comes with maturity. But you can be mature at any age. I've met some young men who are incredibly mature, young men who understand their role and understand who they are. Men, understand that you have a part to play in society. And that place is, of course, to be a safe haven, not only for the ladies that are in your life, but the children and the people around you. Strong masculinity is still top tier and is needed today. And the ladies need that. And the men need the ladies to be who they're supposed to be. In that way, society is, of course, safe and society is growing. That's what we're struggling with today. So that's my advice for men today. It's strength without posing, protection without control, presence without pressure. We can be tough, but turning our strength into a safe place, that to me is top tier masculinity. My name is Robert Dean Steele, and if you like what you've been hearing, then I encourage you to press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, as well, check out my daily shorts. I did a series of them today, and one of the subjects I talked about was this particular subject, but I did it in a much quicker way. So today, check those out. My name is Robert Dean Steele. Thank you for spending time with me. Have yourself a great and godly day.